Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a good lunch, but not too good a lunch, because with the next group of presenters, you're bound to fall asleep. So, no, I hope you had a good morning so far. I thought the first couple of presentations were interesting. Gave us a bit of a forward look, looking at what the industry, manufacturing and sales is going to look like in North America and globally, and a relatively positive picture. Definitely globally, the automotive industry is still going to grow. There will be ups and downs and blips, and certain regions are suffering, as we know, with Brazil and Russia. But overall, we're in a great growing industry. Then the second presentation, looking at linking North America, perhaps a special focus on Mexico, such an important market, as we know. Some interesting discussions there. I'm not sure how many times we've had Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland in our presentations, but I suppose it was bound to happen one day. This afternoon, service parts, after sales. In many ways, for me, it's one of the most important parts of the automotive industry and one of the most important parts for automotive logistics, therefore. Because I suppose the first and perhaps easy reason is that it's a profitable area for car makers. So that's always a good reason for something to be important. But secondly, and I think perhaps most of us might even have personal experience, it's something that impacts your decision on your next vehicle. If you buy we've got a finished vehicle logistics conference coming up, and when I've got a story to tell there about buying a new car and that experience and how it doesn't quite go to plan and how we kind of pretty well treat customers of new cars, of premium brands with disdain. But you get the car, and if you enjoy the car, that first day, the first week when it's gone wrong, you kind of forget about it. But if you have a bad after-sales and service parts experience, or a couple of experiences, if it's not smooth, you remember that. And it can impact your decision on your next car. So that's why the after-sales and service parts supply chain is so important. It might not close a plant. It might not give you hundred thousands of dollars of losses in one day or something like that. But it can certainly impact the brand and the customer experience and the customer's decision on buying a new car. And that's got to be one of the most important things for a vehicle maker. And I'm sure we'll hear over the next hour or so about how the world is changing, the automotive industry is changing, and therefore impacting the supply chain and the service parts industry. We're very fortunate, and I joked earlier, but we've got some great presenters here for this session, representing some pretty important car makers in Volkswagen, Ford, and Toyota. Giving us their views, slightly different angles on where there can be collaboration and where you can share ideas with other parts, even within your own company. So I'm really looking forward to this session. I'm sure it'll be interesting for everyone, and a chance, as usual. The presentations will come first. After the presentations, then we'll go to the Q&A. But I'd like to welcome to the podium the first speaker of this afternoon, a good friend of ours who gave a great presentation a couple of years ago on what inspires him. Well, let's hear today what inspires him from a service parts supply chain. Goel, Vice President of Parts and Vehicle Logistics from Volkswagen Group of America. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. So what inspires me today is to try not to make you go to sleep, as Louis predicted, right? What I found interesting is the timer didn't go when Louis spoke, but it'll go when we speak. Just a high-level overview. I worked for a boss a couple years ago in Europe on the service parts side, and Louis talked about it's a profitable element of the company and arguably the most profitable element. What he told us was, no matter what you do, you're going to impact the business 1 to 3% either way. Don't screw it up. Right? So that's the basic message I'm going to leave you with today, right? If you're ever one of these jobs, don't screw it up. No, it's an eye chart, but high level. This is our organization. I'm responsible with my team for the parts and vehicle logistics. On your left-hand side is the Service Parts Logistics Organization. That's based out of Auburn Hills, Michigan. And then the Vehicle Logistics Organization sits in Herndon, Virginia at corporate headquarters. Between those two functions, we are the second largest cost element of a company. So besides the customer service, the profitable end of it, we are the second largest cost center in the company, managing well over $2 billion in annual spend. Get the next slide. Yes, no? All right. On the service parts side, just to dimension our supply chain for you, and I know my colleagues up here on stage have larger supply chains, but we have about 210,000 part numbers that we service on the service side. We carry about $250 million in inventory at any given time. We ship 13 million lines a year, which is one part number to a dealer. Could be multiple pieces. So we're shipping about 50,000 lines a day. We've got, in the U.S., 7 parts distribution centers, 2 in Canada, 1 in Mexico. We have 2 redistribution centers two-tier network. We bring parts in from Europe to New Jersey and from Mexico through Tennessee. And we're shipping to about 1,000 Volkswagen and Audi dealers, 1,200 if you count Canada. On this vehicle logistics side, and I know this is service parts, but just to help you understand, we're shipping about 550,000 cars a year through 5 ports. We got about 50,000 parking spaces in our ports, 16 railheads, 23 trucking companies, and 7 railways who we're dealing business with. So when you read the little blurb on the banner outside when you walk in, it's how can these 2 organizations work better together? And that's a question I wish I could help you answer. We're not delivering service parts in the back of the cars we're dropping off at dealers, right? So I'll talk about that in a little bit. I think where there's some opportunities, but this is the physical network. When you overlay it, and I showed this to my Canadian team yesterday, and they got pissed off because we cut them off. That's what happens when you're doing PowerPoints at 11 o'clock at night in a hotel room. But there's 2 up there. They're there, right? The things to point out here is Chattanooga. We got the new BSUV going in there later this year. In Mexico, 4th quarter, we'll be making the Q5 for the world in Mexico. So that's going to create some challenges to get in there. What we did with the circles is I've got a port and a depot in Jacksonville, Florida. So when we talk about synergies, I'll tell you one of the biggest synergies we're finding between the 2 functions is personnel development. Cross-functional moves, right? Open up some career opportunities for people between the 2 logistics functions. And we're really doing that with our college trainee program and the dotted lines. We got buildings fairly close to each other out in the East Coast and in LA. So when we talk about just one slide on parts and vehicle logistics, and then we'll go back to parts logistics. One of the similarities, and this is the first one, for the when you're talking to people that don't know what you do for a living, when they hear parts logistics and vehicle logistics, they hear the same thing. Right? That's all the same stuff. You're moving stuff. Doesn't matter. It's easy, right? So I just say logistics isn't a department name, so it's easy. They never forget we're cost centers. When you're managing the amount of money that we do, obviously it gets into cash flow and helping meet profit targets. We are a service and support function, and that's the thing I try to get the team never to forget. That's what we are here to do. And then we put at the bottom, you both get noticed and shot if something doesn't get delivered, right? We're the people that if you don't know who we are, life is good. If you know who we are, that's why I don't like my picture being taken. Right? Anonymity in this place is good. I used to have the same boss that told me don't screw it up. A couple years ago, told me there's a difference between visibility and exposure. You just need to keep that in mind, right? Some of the differences, just ask yourself, because I think this influences what your priorities become in either of the 2 supply chains. Who do you define as the customer? All right, so on the service parts side, is the customer the dealer, the parts manager, the service manager, or the vehicle owner? Depending on the answer to that question, you're going to set it up differently. Once you decide who that customer is, the company's going to have expectations. You and your sales colleagues are going to have expectations of you because we got to deliver everything they dream up. Modes of transportation are different, right? Sea, rail, dedicated truck, LTL, et cetera. Metrics. I think the metrics, at least from my experience on the service side, are more advanced than they are on the vehicle logistics side, at least in our shop, and benchmarking is more advanced on the service side than it is on the vehicle logistics side, right? We've been doing it longer to compare how you do. So I think there's opportunity on the vehicle logistics side when we compare metrics. High level, this is one slide that puts our service parts strategy in a nutshell on one page. You've got the map with our network. You got the words under it, and I'll walk you through that in a second. And then you've got where we were a few years ago when we started this in about 2012. The way you read that chart is for both Volkswagen and Audi, we delivered emergency orders obviously overnight. You use FedEx, UPS, whatever you need to do. You get it there for unit downs, for warranty orders. But stock orders for dealers to replenish their shelves from the time they ordered it to the time they got it, ordering being day 0, took 2 to 4 days. Ordered it on Monday, you're going to get your part Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, right, to replace shelf stock. You can see the bulk of the industry was in the 1 to 2 day range, 2 to 3 day range. We went something we called next day stock order. You order today, Your parts will be there before you open tomorrow morning in 94% of the cases, right, for stock order. Now, when you think about that, you're actually getting better service than you do on emergency orders. Because emergency orders will get there at that time before 10:30 with FedEx. The difference is the stock order cutoff time is earlier than the emergency order cutoff time of 5 p.m. Right? But it will arrive in a dedicated truck and cages with less damage. Damage on dedicated is about, or on FedEx is about 4 times higher than it is on our dedicated service. So our strategy was very simple. We wanted to improve order to delivery, because if you can improve your service time to dealers, they can stock a wider range of parts, less of each, because they can replenish them faster, right? Sounds simple. It is. The concept's great. Getting it done is a different debate, because you also got to get the dealers to do that. You can have the network in place, but if they aren't following what you want them to do, so how do you get them to do that, right? We'll talk about that in a second. We extended the cutoff times. We had a 10 o'clock p.m. stock order cutoff time. How many dealerships are open till 10? Right? You got till 10 though, that's great, right? It's best in the industry. Seriously? We reduced the order types. We had 19 different order types. Confused the hell out of our dealers and our depots, right? You want to talk about productivity in a network, and Helmut can talk to you about this as well. Give them 19 different order types to go pick, because they got different cutoff times, and you're going to go pick one piece and have a person walk the whole warehouse to do that. If you can reduce the amount of order types, you get a lot more efficient in the warehouses. The fourth one I'm going to argue is the most important thing that happens. You can set up your network and whatever you want to drive dealer behavior, but until you change your terms of trade, your discount structure, right, your returns program, everything that gets into that commercial element of it, it's not going to change their behavior. All right? If parts managers are getting paid a discount or getting a bonus off the discount they earned on stock order, so if you take the 2 to 4 day service we had, we gave dealers a discount if they ordered on stock order, right? Stock order utilization over 95%. So if you think about it, we actually gave them a discount to order it the slowest way possible from us if they didn't have it. Right? I mean, just let that sink in. Slowest way possible. I'm going to pay you to do that if you don't have it. And there's the poor customer going, where the hell's my part? Right? Yeah, but I got a bonus. What the hell? So we worked on reshaping dealer inventory. We modified our terms of trade working with our brand colleagues to drive dealer behavior. And I'll walk you through what we did with something we called Suggested Stocking Assortment, SSA. We've got the most liberal returns policy in the industry at 6%. We got arguably the best delivery, right, in terms of order to delivery timing, and yet we give dealers the opportunity to return up to 6% of their parts. They're returning 4.7 today. They're not using it all. Right? You got dealers that use the 6, you got dealers that use the 0. I think most OEs are in the 3 to 4% range. So that's an opportunity, because to me that's just pure waste, right? And if you have a debate with a sales colleague, they'll tell you that logistics owns return policy, and I said, really? If I do, then it's 0. Pure waste. I don't need people bringing parts back. I don't need to pay the freight, right? But you have to have a returns policy from a commercial perspective to help the dealers keep their inventory current. We're watching some companies. There's 2 out there that I know of that are looking at same-day service. Order today, you get the part a couple hours later. You obviously can't do it in the whole network or nationwide, but you can do it within 50, 100, 200 miles of your facing buildings, which would get to about 60% of our dealers. What do you tell the other 40? And then my other question becomes, because I'm not a real big fan of this, but we'll do whatever we need to do to take care of our customers, is if you need it same day, why do I have you? Why do I have the dealer? Right? Because the bulk of the people we've been watching, the same-day parts are the fastest-moving parts, which is stuff I believe the dealer should have. I can understand the slow-moving, big, bulky items that you don't want them to stock same-day requirement, right? But if you have a collision repair, do you need the part same day? Right? Is the customer's expectation to repair the car same day? And then we're looking at retail inventory management system, which I think we're mimicking manually right now with our suggested stocking assortment. It's a high level. That's the service part strategy that we put in place. iChart, obviously, this is suggested stocking assortment. Here's what we are doing with this. Short of putting a system in for retail inventory management. And the beauty of this is it's based on individual dealership sales. So what we do is we look at the sales the dealer has had on a piece level for the last 9 months. And we incent them, give them a discount, modifying the terms of trade, if they keep 80% of those parts in inventory. Because our modeling has shown if they keep 80% of the parts that have sold in the last 9 months, part numbers, they'll get 85% off the shelf, which is best in class in the industry. So the intent is, you're a vehicle owner, you come into the dealership, 85% of the time or more, the dealer will have the parts in inventory to fix your car same day. If they don't happen to have the parts, which should be the slower selling ones outside that 9-month, right, selling one piece, two pieces a year, they order from us, they get it overnight before 8 a.m., they can fix your car and have you up by noon the next day. That is the strategy for the Volkswagen Group of America in a nutshell, right? You come in, that's what we have set up. The beauty of what this has done, and I'm not sure how the other OEs stack up on this, but when we started this a couple years ago, 65% of the inventory our dealers had on hand was on the 10% of sales that were non-suggested stocking assortment. And just say 65% of their inventory was on 10% of their sales. So why does that happen? It happens because we give them promos and discounts and stuff full of inventory that they don't need. It's also because every parts manager believes he's smart in the system. Right? And that's what happens, right? Which is why they ask you for more return privileges. We're now at about 50-50. So we've moved that ratio about 20 points, and what it's done is it's moved $32 million of inventory from non-moving in the dealerships to moving in the dealerships, which helps the dealership cash flow, right? Absolutely opposed to it, because to be able to do this, they have to give me their inventory feed daily, right? But what we worked with our sales colleagues, if you don't give us the inventory feed, you don't get to participate in the discount program, right? And now they love it, right? So that was a huge tie-in with our next day stock order program. We just put a new building up in Sacramento, and the reason we did that was we couldn't get up to the Washington, Oregon area next day out of our LA building. So we were at about 87% of our dealers on next day stock order. The gap in our network was the Pacific Northwest, so we just launched a building in Rockland, just north of, about 80 miles north of Sacramento. Went live in March and April of this year. So we've got, of our 1,000 dealers, I think there's 12 that do not get next day stock order today. Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Alaska, one in Wyoming, one in Montana. My line is, if you live in Puerto Rico, Hawaii, or Alaska, do not complain, all right? I'd be happy to put a building up there and I'll run it, but it's not gonna happen anytime soon. Hopefully when I retire. When we did move out of LA, one of the things that gave us, because we moved 45% of the volume into the Sacramento building to get the Pacific Northwest dealers, it freed up about half the building. Our Porsche colleagues, another brand in our group, were 5 miles away. So Porsche is now moving into the Volkswagen Audi building in Ontario, California. Right? This was a twofer. Right? Worked out very, very well. And about 20% of the Porsche dealers have the exact same address as a Audi dealer. So their parts will ride on the same trucks. Order simplification, we were tough to do business with. Just ask our parts managers. They had to use up to 45 screens to order parts from us. You know, if it's a direct ship part, if it's an accessory, they had to use different screens. If they wanted to track their shipment. So we worked with them, and what I'm proud of with the team here is we involved our 12 National Parts Council members in the development of this for the past 18 months. We've got it down to 5 screens. There's 1 screen they use. There's 4 that they go to. We've consolidated all the information. It's all hot linked. And they're telling us this was better than any of the network changes we made. Right? So this is in the process of going live now. We're live in about 20-25% of the country. By the end of this year, everybody, all our 1,000 dealers will be live. I talked about benchmarking earlier. We're involved with the Carlyle Group, as are 16 other automotive OEMs. And what they do is they collect 20,000 data points or something like that, break it up into 4 categories. Service, which is your fill rates, your back orders, your aging, quality, errors, damages, claims, your safety rates, and then cost and your productivity numbers. And they color code them, right? If you're green, you're in the top quintile. If you're yellow, green, second, right? Yellow, red, third. And if you're red, you're in the 4th. And the reason I show this is the benchmarking that we get on the service part side is a lot further advanced than it is on the vehicle logistics side. And what it allows you to do is see where you stand and figure out what you need to do. And our goal, Volkswagen Group, is we want a balanced scorecard. Right? I'm not looking to be number 1 in productivity at the cost of everything else. You need to manage all 4 elements of those metrics to provide a high level of service to the customers and a return to the company. So our goal in this is balanced scorecard, and then if I was sticking around, you buy me a drink, I'll tell you which one we are. Okay? But if you looked far left, you'd be right. Okay. We also use parts and service manager satisfaction surveys. We look to see how we're doing, right? So we send out questionnaires to our parts managers and service managers, once again benchmark 23 OEMs and 15 on the service manager side. And here's what I look for. You see the different bars for year over year. I look to see if there's steady improvement, right? I could care less what the absolute number is. It's top box, it's 5-box scale. The bars show the dealers that show they're very satisfied or completely satisfied, so top box. And what I like to see is both the VW and Audi brands have a positive trend for the last 3 to 4 years. And here's why, I'll talk to you about why I think that's important in a second. Then that benchmarking on the parts manager side breaks down into 17 categories. So what we do at Volkswagen Group is we work with our parts council, with our brands. We take a look at all 17 categories and we pick the ones we really want to focus on for the next 6 to 12 months so that we are in alignment, because you can work on what you think needs to be worked on, but if your customer does not see that as value, your survey scores don't move, right? You got to triangulate all that data. And the way you read these charts is the bars are where we are in terms of top box satisfaction. The top horizontal line is best in class. So you look to see where you have the biggest gaps from your bar to that top line, and those are the areas you think about going to work on. So that if you look at the second from the right, it's pricing. Anybody want to be best in class on pricing from a customer point of view? All right, you can think about that one for a little bit. It takes alcohol. But that's not one I'm looking to be best in class on. Right? There's a lot more that are on there, and that's how you move the needle. All right, so the last question I'd leave you with, once you figure out who the customer is for both those supply chains, are you focusing on the right things? Are you doing the things that move the needle that are important to them, or are you doing the things that you think are important without involving them? And I think too many companies focus on one or two things and not a balanced scorecard, and I think they focus on things that they think are important and not what the customer values. Right? That's how you move the needle. Right? So with that, Louis, 1 minute, 55 seconds, I'm done. All right? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anu. That was a great start to this session. Really gave an overview of service parts logistics processes and why they're important. Next up, I'd like to welcome to the podium Helmut Nittmann, Global Director of Parts Supply and Logistics for Ford's Customer Service Division. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louis. Let's try to liven up the group. I know after lunch it's a tough time to speak. At the risk of giving myself a performance review, is anybody waiting for a part to have their vehicle repaired, aside from a Takata airbag inflator? Anybody? Nobody has a vehicle down? Okay, you do, okay. And Louis is absolutely right. I mean, that's our primary focus, is to make sure that our customers, I think any manufacturer keeps their customers on the road day to day. And that's by far the biggest challenge we face, and I'll show you some of the attributes we look at in terms of complexity and how we manage and run the business. And it can definitely get very complex. Anu brought up some of the key metrics that we look at, both from a dealer standpoint and also how we run our operations. So some of the similarities, I'm keeping this at a very high level. I could probably spend hours on each of these topics, but I'll go through some of the similarities, give a little brief description around how we approach the business with production, and that could either be manufacturing or also with purchasing. So we have supplier technical assistance that helps us with acute supply issues. So delivery performance ratings is probably the single biggest benefit that we've achieved from a service parts standpoint. So when vehicle production schedules their vehicles and the parts and the bill of material needed to build a vehicle into the manufacturing plant, we have the same delivery metrics for those suppliers, and we have a common rating system that we can score our suppliers on, and it really evolves around delivery. So when we issue a schedule to our supply base, we have expectations on when that part will be delivered to us. And when we go to that supplier, we can have a common voice between production and service and talk about the impacts. I'd say it's probably the single biggest benefit of having a common and standardized reporting system. Quality performance ratings are also a key indicator. I like to think of our operation as a canary in the coal mine. Typically from a service parts standpoint, especially with new vehicle launches, As that vehicle picks up with units in operation, you do see trends. It's not always consistent. Certainly on crash parts, you can see as the vehicles increase in operation, you're going to get more crash parts sold because there are more vehicles on the road. But there are certainly other things like mechanical parts, especially with newly introduced systems that the industry is facing, whether it's new engine technology, transmission technology, or electronics, that many times will be the first indicator to see if there is an issue with the vehicle. So we have very robust processes to look at demand from an historical standpoint and also get back with our quality teams to make sure they understand if there's an emerging issue and get that feedback to the plant as quickly as possible. I'd say the biggest benefit from a financial standpoint is certainly around inbound logistics. Not as great if you look at the total spend that each operation has on inbound logistics, primarily because of the fact that we service at a lower level than an assembly plant would buy at. So assembly plants will have full assemblies, whether it's an instrument panel, brake corner modules, full assemblies. We'll go to the sub-tier suppliers to get the components to service the vehicles. But the real idea is to establish milk runs in a common supply area, whether it's Mexico, Midwest. We have assembly plants in Louisville, for example, that can collect those smaller shipments and then bring them back to our distribution centers. I really enjoyed the presentation this morning about leveraging a hyper-physical internet or network where potentially OEMs could use, especially on the service side, the ability to collect those smaller shipments and bring them back to the respective service organizations. It definitely gets a little challenging on the production side. Vehicle production typically outweighs the service side, so many times we are tracking the inbound lead time. Many times there's a considerable amount of variability depending on what the origin and final destination is. So I definitely see some opportunities on that end. Fourth point, leveraging production for constrained parts, especially around recalls. And I think all of us from the OE side, regardless of what manufacturer you are, faces this challenge. And this really is a fast-paced approach. All of us are very much involved with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and other legal entities across the globe. That's very important to get the feedback as quickly as possible to make sure we know if a vehicle is having an issue, to understand with engineering what the remedy is going to be. And then also figuring out how quickly can you resurrect the supply chain if it's a past model part, or balance between production and service if it's a shared part. And that's probably the most beneficial area where we can go. In Ford, we have what's called operating committee meeting reviews, business plan reviews. Those are held weekly. And depending on the complexity and of the issue and kind of the reach within the organization, we have opportunities to bring these larger issues to a broader audience. We'll actually talk about taking vehicle production down to satisfy service requirements, either pulling schedules ahead or looking at actually taking vehicle production down. I have to say it's probably the biggest benefit, especially with in-house suppliers. We have a lot of stamping plants, powertrain plants. Just by virtue of putting the metrics, performance metrics on behind schedule and back order parts in front of a director of manufacturing and then the VP for manufacturing, we've achieved a considerable amount of support to make sure that they realize the impact on our customers. And it's, I'd say it's probably the single biggest benefit that we've seen. So from a different standpoint, actually this really frames, I like these set of charts quite a bit because it really talks about some of the major differences we face between production and service. And FCSD is a Ford Customer Service Division. So on the left side, part numbers, generally in production there's few because once the vehicle balances out, then we'll start again with a new set of suppliers and parts. We'll also assemble vehicles with assemblies as opposed to individual components. On the service side, we have an order of magnitude, probably 5 or 6 times what we see in production. Ford's part count is very similar to VW's. We have about 250,000 in North America. Globally, we have about 600,000 different part numbers, unique part numbers. The other challenge is the life cycle of a part. So when the vehicle is in production, it could be a very short period, let's say 2 years. It could be a very long period. We've had things like transmissions in production for 20 years. We just balanced that out last year. But we also have vehicle production parts that are in service or in production for 2 years. On the service side, we're expected to keep those from anywhere from 10 to 20 years after a vehicle is finished production for a number of reasons, either demand or for safety related issues. Suppliers, and again, that correlates to the part count side. Typically in production, there are fewer, and the focus is much more intense from a production side. The spend is considerably higher. It's about 10 to 12 times higher than what we see on the service side. You get a lot of focus, and I think Wendy summarized that very well before too, in terms of the interrelationship with the supply base and how you interface with the suppliers. A lot of it is definitely relationship based, and that's where we leverage, from a service standpoint, how to make sure that the company understands what the impact is to our customers. That's been a key benefit for us. And then on the volume side, typically, as time progresses, the first couple years of a vehicle program, volume is extremely high when we're producing 400,000 vehicles. In the F-Series case, we build north of 800, 900,000 a year, which is extreme for any single vehicle line. But then when it goes out of production, that volume drops off, and the service demand slowly picks up as that vehicle ages. And then there will be a curve at usually in year 4 or 5, and then start trailing down as that vehicle either doesn't need the part anymore, or one of the biggest challenges we're faced with is aftermarket supply, where there are aftermarket entries. You have a lot of copiers, you've got a lot of folks that sell into the aftermarket very effectively. And that's one key area that we're also looking at to try to increase our share of the service industry. And then from a production standpoint, as I thought about it, there's really 5 key areas I think about. Many of these start in discussions around things like inventory. Why don't we use the car carriers to deliver parts at the back, which is, I still scratch my head on that one. But these are kind of the things I run into on a day-to-day basis. So from a scheduling and planning standpoint, typically when you build a vehicle, you have a discrete schedule. You know 2 to 3 months out what you're going to be building. On the service side, it's basically you turn the lights on in the morning, orders come in, and then you fill those as best as you can. We have a goal to hit 98% of any order that comes in to be filled that day. 2% is still a miss. When we ship 200,000 order lines a day, that's 4,000 lines that we're not filling. So there's a lot of challenges to get back and make sure you understand where that supply gap is coming from. On the inventory side, I like this analogy quite a bit. We build vehicles just in time, so a dealer has it just in case. And when we buy a vehicle, you typically go to a lot and you look at what they have available. You say, I'll take that one, or they'll look through the dealer inventory. And from a manufacturing standpoint, inventories turn typically 50 times. Often get the question from the finance team, why can't you turn the service inventory 50 times? To which I respond, how fast do the vehicles actually turn on the dealer's lots, right? We have about 70 plus days on hand, which is usually 4 to 5 turns. So I think we're pretty comparable. On the FCSD side, or service, we have inventory just in case. So Anu pointed out they have about 250 million in inventory. In North America, Ford has about $750 million. So we have that stockpile of inventory just in case when an order comes in, we can fill it and ship the order next day. Frequency is another big factor. So on the vehicle side, material coming into the plant is usually scheduled daily and probably in many cases hourly to keep the assembly line running. On the service side, when we issue a schedule to our supply base, it can be anywhere from weekly to lifetime. So as for current model parts, for example, we can get those parts typically on a weekly cadence. When a plant closes down, they'll typically say the entire assembly line is being torn down. You can either move the tools or take an all-time buy. So in many cases, we will take all-time stockpiles. Delivery frequency to dealers. We have in the US 3,100 dealers, globally about 10,000 dealers. Our focus is to get parts to dealers as quickly as possible. And Anu also mentioned many of the benefits of a dealer being able to order a part today, having it delivered tomorrow. They can lean down their inventory, broaden the number of parts they stock, and have a higher probability of satisfying their customer when they come in. And then on the service side, it's daily. So again, typically order by 4 p.m., deliver by 10 a.m. in most cases. And then at the level of parts purchased, again, typically in the production side, we'll buy full assemblies, whether they're engine assemblies going into the assembly plant, or on the service side, we'll have the individual components down, the spark plugs, nuts and bolts, and every program will track the same level of release through the system. That's all I got. Louis, we introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Helmut. Oops, that's better. Thank you, Helmut. Another good presentation there, giving us an idea of where Ford's customer service division is going. And if you're interested in more about the Ford customer service division, the current issue of Automotive Logistics, which should be in your packs, the front cover story is Frederic Tony, who's Helmut's boss, the president of Global Ford's customer service division. So I hope you'll find that story interesting as well. Just to share some thoughts and some views before we go to the panel discussion, I'd like to welcome to the podium Ed Huante, the General Manager of Service Parts and Accessory Supply for Toyota Motor Sales.
Thank you, Louis. Good afternoon. I just have a few remarks for you today. I think what I wanted to do is fill in for a couple of my colleagues. Doug Adams, who's responsible general manager for the OE logistics side, was going to be here, but we actually have a pretty good story to tell. I'll start off with talking about some of the synergies between OE and OES, or service parts. Currently at Toyota, we're actually beginning this venture after all the years that we've been manufacturing vehicles in the U.S., as well as having parts distribution centers around. We're now at the point where we're actually moving forward with integrated inbound logistics for North American parts. And I'm happy to tell you that we began this journey about probably 18 months ago, and part of it really came from the North American growth. The other part that we talked about with some colleagues yesterday is that the average driver age in America has hit an all-time high at 56. So as the average driver age comes up, we have to be more efficient with our total logistics network and make sure that we're conscious that we can basically leverage our volumes together. I'd like to give you a few statistics that hopefully will help set the picture for our service logistics network. On the service part side, we basically manage about 340,000 part numbers here in North America. And I'll explain to you how we use that to service our dealers. We basically have 4 global poles within the Toyota network globally. In the United States, we have what's called the North American Parts Operations, and we maintain the supply and safety stock for all North American produced and all imported parts, basically for North America, including Puerto Rico and the Pacific Islands. In Japan, they maintain the majority of Asia, with the addition of Africa and some parts of other parts, small pockets like Russia and China as well. Toyota Motor Manufacturing Europe in Brussels basically manages most of the European nation and a little bit of Northern Africa. And then we have Toyota Motors Asia Pacific, which is out of Thailand. And the reason I tell you that is we all have redundant inventories. We all use one part numbering system. So as we import vehicles or trade vehicles between one market to another, the market that's selling the vehicle, it is the global pole's responsibility to now maintain safety stock for that region of the world. So in the North America, my responsibilities include the procurement or the actual supply and inventory management for North America, and managing all the imported vehicle service parts that come in either from any of the other markets. So by having the global poles, we then have what we call part centers, or we call it redistribution centers. We have one in Kentucky that does most of the import from the Atlantic. And once again, there's redundant inventory coming in from other parts, as well as all North American. And there we maintain about 120,000 part numbers. In Ontario, California, it's where we import all our parts from Japan mainly, and other markets across Pacific Ocean. And there we maintain about 240,000 part numbers. The next stage of our supply chain then is we have what's called regional parts distribution centers, like many of our counterparts do in other companies. And there, at each one of those part numbers, if it's a mixed Toyota and Lexus parts distribution center, they generally carry anywhere from 95,000 to just over 100,000 part numbers for both Toyota and Lexus. If it's a Lexus only parts distribution center, then it generally carries about 45,000 parts. And if it's a Toyota only, it's basically about 75,000 parts. Once we have some redundant, specifically the fastest moving inventory is redundant. Our dealerships, 1,500 dealerships throughout North America, carry about 3,000 part numbers on average. So they're basically carrying most of the fastest moving inventory only. And we've positioned these inventories together just to make sure that we're all managing a few days of supply of just safety stock. Now, what we do to increase that ownership experience is very similar, as Anu was talking about with Volkswagen, is we have what's called an order to arrival commitment. So we enjoy delivering nighttime unattended delivery. Mainly all nighttime unattended deliveries take place for about 85% of our dealerships. And we also have rolled out a new service, in addition to the overnight service. We also rolled out a new service called same-day service. And the target of same-day service is for us to make sure we can put a second delivery. So our dealerships order by 10 in the morning, and we deliver to either a dealership or a remote drop site. Well, all multiple dealers will come and pick up. The goal of that is to have 70% of our units in operations enjoy a second delivery. So you can see dealers will order at 10 for deliveries at 1:30. Most dealers will order at 3, 4, 5, or 6 in the evening, with deliveries before 7 a.m. Nighttime 10 delivery is really the way we like to work. We try to maintain 96% facing fill rate from the distribution centers to the distributors, and we like to maintain 95% facing fill rate from the PDCs into our dealers. We use what's called small lot high frequency, so we're basically doing just-in-time inventory. We have constant inventory either from a global pool, from a part center to a PDC, or from a PDC to a dealer. There's constant ordering. It's called small lot high frequency ordering. So it's a constant pipeline of inventory that we maintain. And it works pretty good most of the time. Service part demand is different than the OE planning, which is why we're going very slow with our consolidation of the inbound logistics. Today, we have full truckloads that we basically have handed over from the service part side, basically have handed over to the manufacturing counterparts at Toyota and said, through your purchasing and manufacturing logistics planning, please maintain all the inbound for North America. Soon, we will be integrating milk runs. So in addition to the full trailer loads or direct shipments, we'll now be integrating milk runs, but that's requiring some changes mainly on the service part side. Where my groups had to change is we had to do what's called annual plan verification and supplier planning 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years in advance. It's not quite perfect when it comes to service parts demand, but it's better to do some type of long-term planning than not do any. The second part that we have to do is we have to change our packaging. In the service parts world, our packaging engineers basically are responsible for doing what's called unit price package. We determine the cost of the packaging, either for quality or for efficiency reasons. And then now with the manufacturing, we have to change master packs. They have a different cycle. So for inbound logistics, it's redeployed about 10 times per year. The routes are redesigned about 10 times per year, and the position in those milk runs will change for our service parts pickups. So based on the position and the size of the position they're going to give me, I've got to redesign master packs about 10 times a year as well. So my packaging engineers have now gone from unit price packaging to now master part packaging. So there is a lot of changes that have to take place in order for it to fit. It doesn't just come together as easy. And the reason it doesn't come together is it will make you crazy thinking that any variation in service parts demand is going to stop the manufacturing line, because that's the risk. We're going to be putting our service parts together with the pre-sequence parts for manufacturing. And the three biggest challenges that we see today on the service part side, I'll leave you with the three biggest challenges. It is the 17.5 million SAR. There's unemployment rates in parts of the North American region where unemployment is down below 2%. And a lot of our suppliers who move to these rural areas for good economic reasons are having difficulty getting workers to come and get our service parts produced. The second part is we're seeing some global events take place, weather. Just showing Louis this morning, I have listed here global events such as weather. We saw the earthquake recently in Japan and some of the component shortages. Well, we just had a big event in Texas yesterday, and our manufacturing plant in Texas was closed down temporarily. But we're seeing the tier 1, tier 2 component shortages, and really our suppliers are working 24/7. So we're going to have the same type of performance from our suppliers for service parts that we're getting for our OE parts. The second part that changes a little bit is something called the Global Chemical Standards and Management. And there's a lot of new export compliance changes. Some of the new changes that came out last year is like Global Harmonization Standards, TSCA, and now there's some new foreign consumer and environmental protection regulations that we have to maintain as well on the service parts side. Those are adding variance and difficulty in the supply chain with OE parts. And then the final challenge is we do see growing extended warranties or special warranty adjustments or recalls. And those, of course, for safety recalls, come with high velocity, very short planning. We have to report within 5 days in NHTSA, so the inventory planning and purchasing happens in large amounts, and that's going to add variation to our planning. So we're having to work a lot closer with our production team as well, again, to work our ways through that. But all in all, there are a lot of synergies with the service parts and inbound logistics. And whenever possible, we also like to think that we help work with the new vehicle sales. So the same-day service example, one of the things we're doing today is if a dealership, for whatever reason, did not get the accessory option, we don't just use that same-day service for service parts. If they didn't get the accessory options, we ask them to use the same-day service as well to get the dealer-installed options put in, also to move the vehicle on the same. So we're working with the sales side, we're working with the production side, and I'm happy to tell you that after all these years, it's finally coming together, and we think some of the synergies will come. And thanks for the opportunity to share our process. Thank you. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. Another great presentation. Hearing again a different car maker, different issues that you face. Well, issues that you all face, I guess. But you know, presenting them from your perspective there. So I think there was 3 great presentations that on a similar subject, but each had their different nuances that gave us a different idea of what different car makers do. So again, this is your part of the conference. It's a chance for you to ask questions to the panel, to make comments. They've been a little bit too friendly throughout the day today, so anything that can upset them and cause trouble between them and friction would be greatly appreciated. And the usual rules apply. If you raise your hands, wait for the microphone, and say your name and company name, and then ask the questions. In the middle there, and then to the younger gentleman on the edge.
Thanks, Louis. You wanted me to ask a nasty question, so I'll start off with that. Can you talk a little bit about some of the impacts that the recalls that we're seeing across the industry are having in the aftermarket side of it, whether it's higher logistics costs, whether it's on your inventory, whether it's for production, supplier, capacity, and things? If you can maybe give us some specifics on the impact.
Yeah, sure. Do I have to press this here, or is it can you hear me? Perfect. I guess Ford probably has the most recalls, so I'll take it between Toyota and VW. Got the most experience, unfortunately. I'd say quite a few challenges. First, at the dealer body level, I'd say one of the biggest things that have to be considered is their capacity to be able to manage the recalls. Definitely a lot of different complexities depending on the type of repair necessary. When recalls are announced, I often hope that it's going to be a software reflash as opposed to a physical part having to be replaced. But I think we've got a fairly good system. We have weekly meetings with the Automotive Safety Office, and they're Ford's main point of contact with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. In that group, we also have the Service Engineering Operations Organization that helps us understand the physicals that the dealer will have to go through in terms of the parts. They'll define the vehicle population, the mix and location of vehicles. Many times it could be a regionally impacted type of recall depending on corrosion states or high humidity, for example. And then from my standpoint, we get the engineering organization engaged, always look for a solution for a part, and it can vary to a relatively easy fix something that can be designed and implemented relatively quick. And then we have the other extreme with things like the Takata airbag inflator, where there currently really, for some of the models, is no solution. So those are still being developed. And it's very important to have those communication links, not just from a parts supply standpoint, but also to make sure that our customers understand what's being done to remedy the situation. It's, I say every recall has a little different twist to it, but we certainly know who in the Ford organization to contact in terms of really re-engaging the entire part design and production process. And it really varies. We could have a 70,000 vehicle recall population, which is relatively small, all the way up to 2 million vehicles. So if you look at that relative to how many vehicles get produced in a year, typical assembly plant can make 250 to 300,000 a year. We're looking at 4 times annual volume in a very short period of time. The other thing we see when we mail out the letters, we usually get about I'd say a 30% response rate within the first 60 to 90 days. And then over, I'd say, a 6 to 8 month period, that kind of peaks out. Roughly about 70% of customers will actually come back to get their vehicle repaired. So I think there's a lot more focus. I know National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is looking at ways to entice the manufacturer and to figure out how to get customers back in and get their vehicles repaired. It's, I think that's going to be a challenge still. In the inventory that we have to support that is considerably higher. I think we've got about 4 times the amount of inventory we had probably about 6 years ago. So a lot more inventory, a lot more activity. I'd say on the plus side, Ford cycle plan is changing a lot faster. So as we don't have as many vehicles in operation, so we're catching issues a lot earlier, which definitely helps from a total cost standpoint.
It actually is a pretty complicated situation, as Helmut discussed. I think I'll give you the 3 probably breakdowns. Is you have the safety recalls, and then we have what are called voluntary recalls. So the safety recalls, we have to move quickly, and there's not a lot of time and planning. The safety recalls, briefly, just to give you an idea, is we have to maintain the inventory for the life of those vehicles on the road. So whether the customers come in at their convenience to get the vehicles fixed or not, we have to maintain the inventory until the registered vehicles are fixed. So we have to track the completion rates. And customers aren't as motivated as they once were maybe 5 or 6 years ago when recalls first became prominent. So it's a lot of work to get them. So in the meantime, there is a huge burden of major stock, especially for large recalls that we have to carry. The voluntary recalls, we basically have a little more time. So we do what's called capacity order planning. So we plan supply. Generally, we'll buy about 30% of that up front, and then we let it begin to operate on daily order as much as possible. But what we've done is we're taking measures today. We keep the recall activity as far away from the regional distribution centers and only provide them enough for the regional demand. So each regional center gets allocated. So the part centers, which is the first tier, carries the majority of the variation. And then you have a lot of technical service bulletins now, and we have a lot of extended warranty. And some of the extended warranties or the warranty enhancement products is really interesting as well. There's a lot of litigation that's settled, and there's rulings that come in like 10 years after first use. So somebody who bought a 2013 Camry, we're sitting on these parts also until 2023, or until all the registered vehicles have been completed as well. So I think they're each different, and our quality engineers always say campaigns and recalls that come out, they're like snowflakes. Each one is different, and neither two are the same, so they require a lot of planning. And the key, I guess I would leave is we're really working hard to separate the variation that's created by that type of business. If we try to manage campaign parts the same way we manage our daily order service parts, we're going to drive ourselves crazy. So we have to accommodate that variation with its almost an individual supply chain to make it work for the customer, the dealerships, distribution centers, and the suppliers as well.
Yep. Going last, right? I'm not quite sure what to add. Just give you a couple other thoughts to consider. I think it starts with what are the customer's expectations on a service action, right? As Ed said, you've got safety issues, voluntary, you got normal, you got emissions, whatever in it. So if you're a mom driving around and you hear about a brake issue, right? Safety on your vehicle, you want it fixed immediately. So now you got to start talking about, are the parts available? Do the dealerships have the service capacity? What's the scheduling? If you call them, they say, I can get you in a week. Are you going to feel comfortable driving your car around? So start with the expectations, then how do you meet those expectations? You also got to look to see if the parts, if there's parts required, as Helmut said, there's parts and there's software. Can you deliver the software without the customer having to come to the dealership for a flash, right? I mean, it's something I think we got to think about. Do our engineers feel comfortable with someone delivering a software flash without them coming to a dealership, right? Because it's another opportunity to sell them other parts. If it's parts required, are they existing parts or are they something new? Right? Because if they're existing, you get in the debate of can you get it out of production if you need it, right? If it's new, you got to validate and all that kind of stuff. One of the other things I think you got to look at as we go through these, I'm not sure how good some other companies or even us are at a validated repair procedure, right? You say, I need these components, and then you go to do the repair and you realize you forgot a nut, bolt, screw, gasket, right? Can you imagine holding up a recall, getting everything lined up, and then you bring the customer into the dealership and you realize you forgot to include a part, an ancillary part. So I think a validated repair procedure is absolutely key and robust before you can get something going there. What we use to manage expectations, because with NHTSA you got what, 5 days to announce. You announce it, it goes on the website, customer knows if the car is impacted. You may not have a fix for 6 months, a year, whatever, right? So how do you manage that customer during that process? But for the ones that we do have, we've come up with a process, because when you look at that chart I showed you that had the breakdown and benchmarking on the 17 bars, 17 categories, recalls, campaigns is one of the categories. And it's typically one of the lower category for most OEMs. And that's because the expectations don't match what you're able to deliver, right? They want it now, immediately, because that's what the customer's looking for. What we do, and as both Ed and Helmut have mentioned, our modeling, because we will model, everyone's different, but you can model emissions, safety type recalls, and they're right, about 70% of customers come back on safety recalls. You have to figure out how to get that up. But on go live date, we look to have 40 to 60% of inventory in our dealerships to support the demand, because we typically see 40 to 60% come back in the first 6 to 9 weeks. And we use a process that we call targeted allocation. We know what VINs are tied up in each region, and we pre-populate dealership inventory where they don't have to order with fair share allocation proportionately on those VINs. So that they got it, and then what we do is they repair one, we replace it. Right? Until such point we got enough inventory and we open up free supply, because that way you don't have one dealer hoarding the market and selling to others, right? So it's a fair distribution model, right? You populate them and then you replace them until you get supply that can free up to handle it a little bit better.
Thank you. Do you still have a question there?
Yeah, Glenn Carver, Delta Wing. Light personal question for Helmut. How do you not have a German accent?
Born in New Jersey. German parents.
Which exit?
And I don't have a Jersey accent either. I don't think so, at least.
Any more questions?
Gilberto Cuellar with Maxi on Wheels. I have a question for the panel in general. What are your best practices for customs compliance management in the service parts arena? I mean, I would like to know how the 3 different companies, what are their best practices for managing documentation, and we're a supplier for parts for all 3, and have an idea of the actual differences. But what would be the best practices you could tell about how to manage customs compliance? There's new trade agreements with different countries coming up left and right, or that were not in place when the first a particular business, a particular program was in place, and then all of a sudden that supplier, that customer, that entire supply chain has to comply with that new international agreement. What are your best practices in that arena?
Want me to go?
Go for it.
Okay, my best practice is we outsource it. We're in the business of servicing parts, right? We are not the experts in customs compliance, right? So we use people that are experts in it. Now, just to give you a little overview, a little more transparency in our network, 70% of what we sell in the US and Canada comes from Europe in terms of service parts. 12 to 13% is US domestic built, SOT and then VSUV come in, and then the remaining 15, 16, 17% is Mexico sourced, right? So the bulk of our stuff is coming through borders. We are absolutely lousy at duty drawback. I got parts moving between US and Canada all the time, right? I'm paying duties and I'm not bringing them, I'm not recovering it. So we work with a partner that is their area of expertise, and we rely on them to help us keep current and get things moving. Because if you look at the networks and as lean as they have got, I mean, $750 million of inventory is a ton. It may seem like a ton, right? And it is. I got a quarter of $1 billion. If something gets held up in customs, it's not clearing in 4 or 5 hours, right? It could sit there 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, depending on what was missing. You bring a container in with 100 parts and there's one part that's got an issue, right? As you know, you're gonna hold the whole container up. We bring something called red orders, request for an expedited delivery, right? Unit down that we air in from Europe. You got a customer waiting, pick an R8, right? Because that's what my son wants. And you got a part for a unit down for a customer paid 180 grand for a car that's sitting in customs for 3 weeks. You can't have that happen, right? So, a long way of saying it's not our core business. We do have a customs department, but we rely on other people that do this for a living.
Yeah, I'd have to say it's very similar to Ford's situation. It's extremely complex too. I mean, I've been involved in a couple of cases too with Saudi Arabia, for example, and Russia, where country of origin is a very challenging thing to define. You know, sitting in front of a customs broker and explaining, you have a part that's an assembly, you have a bearing in the middle with a pulley on the outside. We say it's made in Canada, but then if you look at the bearing on the inside, it has stamped on the inside, made in China. So the paperwork is inconsistent with the physical part, and you know, it's very inconsistent in terms of definitions around what is made in what country. You know, I think part of it is inconsistencies in the definitions of country of origin, and also the manufacturer's data inconsistencies. Many times you look at, you know, especially when you resource a part, you have inventory that's burning off. It's not always first in, first out. So you can definitely have situations where a part was made in the US, resourced in Mexico. It is a very complex, challenging business. We do rely on outsourced providers, and I'd say duty drawback is probably the other biggest opportunity / challenge that we face. And we've uncovered a few of them, but I definitely think there's more dollars in there.
At Toyota Motor Sales, I think it's pretty similar. I'll break it down into 3 different areas for you. The inbound, importing parts. I think we have to learn of how the agencies hold. So if a container is held, they're generally held for inspection due to one part, and it's probably a controlled market, some type of a textile or something that's going to control it. Could be like a dollar part, and there's multiple containers. But what we learned is that the customs will hold containers associated with a bill of lading. So our administration department wanted to save money and wanted to issue 1 bill of lading for every 50 containers. Well, if there's 1 container and 1 part in one of those containers, all 50 were being held. So now we print a bill of lading for only 10 containers at a time. So if there is a hold, it's only going to impact the few amounts. So what I would recommend is understand how the holds work on the inbound side, and then have your administration. It's only $100 difference per bill of lading is what we found, versus holding all that revenue. The second is, what do we control within our physical part? And I think we control inventory is what we control. As Helmut said, we're sourcing parts sometimes from Canada, sometimes from the US or Mexico, and we don't necessarily have to operate like food. It's not first in, first out. We can keep the parts stored. So what we do is we study the markets we're going to be exporting to, and I think Saudi Arabia is a great example. Very complicated export business there, especially with letters of credit. They have letters of credit for banking. So it's a really complicated business to do business. So we understand what parts they're going to order, and we physically go and manage the country of origin labeling. And as soon as the change is completed, we physically exhaust it. We make the physical change then when we exhaust that. Or we only ship a certain amount just to make sure that the systems that we use to process match the physical shipments. Obviously, weight is a real big issue as well. So in addition to the additional weight requirements coming out, we need to make sure the weight is correct, because if the weight is off on the documents and it weighs differently from when they arrive, they're going to hold it. So every little simple thing matters, so we need to have physical control. And then I like what Anu said, you outsource the administration. We are not documenters, we're not freight forwarders. So we learn to have outsourcing on site, and then we outsource off-site as well for additional freight forwarding processing. And then we basically just monitor and get reported back, and only deal with exceptions in-house when the freight forwarder or a customs broker asks us to do it. But you know, that documentation we have to outsource, because that's not our expertise.
Yep. If I can just give you another one, think about network design, right? I showed you the map, cut off Canada. Well, we have a building in Vancouver. The drive from our new building in Sacramento up to Seattle, Portland, right? It's a long haul, less than it was from LA. You can get there overnight. Can you service Portland, Seattle, Washington, Oregon out of Vancouver better than you can out of Sacramento, right? How easy is it to go northbound? How easy is it to go southbound across a border, right? Especially if you've got next day service. Coming southbound is tough, right? For the issues we talked about. Going northbound is a lot easier. So do you put the building in Seattle and do you close the one in Vancouver, right? Or do you renew Vancouver and come southbound? I mean, those implications, right? Duty drawback, the delays and crossing the borders, go into your network design philosophy as well. The other thing you look at is cars we sell in Canada are different than the cars we sell in the U.S., which means service parts that you got to store in each one's are different too. So sounds simple, right? Put it in Seattle, go north into Vancouver, it's easier to cross the border, you can meet the order delivery timing, but you got to look at the footprint of the parts you're going to have to store here, because Canada's got different service parts requirements. So it goes beyond just crossing. It hits every element of your supply chain.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, in the middle first, and then we'll come up.
Hello, Vince Peters with DHL Supply Chain. Lou, I don't know if you remember, I sponsored a panel in Detroit, I think it was 2009, and we had a healthy discussion. I think Tom Lindquist was there from Chrysler, and we had Pam Steck from Ford, and there were a few other participants like Dan Farrell from Nissan and so forth. And one of the themes coming out of the downturn was managing parts and the competition between production parts and service parts, and the concern about how do you ramp up and compete for those and so forth. So here we are 7, 8 years later, whatever the number is, and I'd be curious, in your view, does that challenge still exist? And how are each of your respective companies dealing with that as you try to get synergies of working with these suppliers and that competing demand in your own organizations?
It's always going to be a challenge, I think. I mean, every manufacturer's focus is to get new vehicles built and on the road. It's like dripping water on a stone. I think over time you'll start making progress. Like I said before, I think on the Ford side, from a supply standpoint, at least, we figured out some of the key metrics to keep the internal plants engaged and focused. We also have new model launch metrics, so whenever we do launch a new vehicle, we target to have 98+% of all serviceable parts available at OK to buy, which is important more to establish the supplier relationship, especially as you get down to sub-tier suppliers. It's definitely gotten better. I mean, but I do think it's going to be a thing that always has to be watched and monitored. There's nothing that you can set on autopilot and let it go. The other thing I think you have to include are things like capacity planning. To the extent you can make sure that tooling incorporates service requirements, it's a very challenging thing to do. Certain commodities, service will outsell what's purchased on the production side. So there's definitely considerations that have to be made in terms of incremental tooling to support service, things like filters, belts, that definitely sell more. I'd say the trickier part is if it's a part that has never had an issue, and then when you launch it for whatever reason, it becomes an issue, and then you really have to scramble to get incremental tooling in place. So I'd say it's having the processes in place and knowing the right touch points within the organization to hit those constraints as they develop.
Yeah. And I think something that we're seeing is severe weather is becoming a real issue. It was recently, I think we all saw that hailstorm that hit the Dallas area recently, and our suppliers, when we're selling 17.5 million vehicles a year, suppliers in North America, they're pretty tapped out because a lot of them shut down, a lot of them downsized, and they really haven't made the reinvestment since after the recession. So when you have this inclement weather and you see a huge spike on either windshields or molding, you've got to really work with the suppliers and OEM. We really got to start doing some really good planning. The challenges we're seeing today, I think, are pretty significant. I think I talked about the unemployment rate. There are suppliers, especially in the Southeast today in North America, that basically have capacity, but they can't get the employment. They can't get the employment in their geographic area. That's one challenge. The second challenge is we've got other suppliers who are running 24/7. And without doing maintenance to the tooling and the equipment, it becomes a challenge as well. And then we have to work with our internal manufacturing side because sometimes they want to save money on, which makes a lot of sense, to reuse or just redo a tool. But what they're basically doing is they're destroying a past model tool. So, we have to work really close even on the tooling and really stay with it. I think that in the service parts world, if you continue to try to operate individually in service parts during this very, very high capacity period, low capacity available, we have to really start to model more of the manufacturing behaviors. So we have to do engineering planning with them. We have to do 3-year forecasting. You have to do everything different than what we use in service parts in order to be able to have reserved service part production there. But it's going to stay tough, and if we hit 18 million, we're going to hit a whole new level of toughness. And I have a joke, and the suppliers don't like to have me say it, but there's times where I can't get a service part, and sometimes they're brake pads. So the meetings will start out like, Toyota dealers running out of brake pads is like McDonald's running out of French fries. It's just unacceptable. And we have to start the meetings, but we have to kind of prioritize service parts as well, because in this world, it's OE rules. But you have to make the statement for service parts, and they generally will rebound right away, but still a problem.
Yeah, just maybe a slightly different take on it. I'm waiting to meet the first OE that says they'll build a car ahead of taking care of a customer's car down. Right? Nice to say, it's good public relations and all that kind of stuff, and every one of us has got policies in place. Here's the question that I ask: how often do you use it, or how often do you need to use it? Right? Usually, service parts demand is not going to shut down an assembly plant. Right? The OE plant is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It is. The question is, do you have the processes in place, and are you adamant enough up front to be involved in the planning process, right? And then it gets in the whole snowflake debate. And stuff's going to happen. The question is, how do you get through it, right? Mm-hmm. To me, if you're on the service parts side, hang tough. Right? Make the production guy prove to you the plant's going to shut down, and it's going to cost, pick a number, 100 million, 200 million, 400 million to shut the plant down, right? There's no friggin' way that plant's shutting down for 8 brake pads. Mm-hmm. It isn't, because he's got 1,000 of them sitting there on the floor. Right? So I think part of that is, I do believe capacity is going to be a bigger problem. I firmly believe that the tooling issue, all of that stuff comes into play, right? But it is too easy as a service guy to get run over by production. Don't let it happen. Right? You're not going to make friends. Right? You're not going to get a job on the production side. You're the advocate for the customer. Hang tough.
That's right.
Thank you. The only thing is, I think if my brake pads were going, I'd drive slower or more carefully, but McDonald's without fries. Any more questions? Was there a question on the edge, on the end here? In the middle? Sorry, so our guys are getting a bit older now than...
Scott Loyal from Fiat Chrysler Automobiles. And my question is have you looked at servicing vehicles at the customer location rather than at the dealership, particularly on simple things like reflashes or simple campaigns? And if you have, and what are the barriers to doing that?
I'll start. We've actually, on the Lincoln side in Ford, we've started not servicing at the customer site, but we'll actually go and pick up the customer's vehicle and leave them a loaner vehicle and then bring the car back to the dealership to repair it. We have not experimented with repairing at the customer site yet, but more the kind of the reverse of that. Been highly effective. I think we're going to start rolling that out with the 17 model year, where customers will get that as a service within, it's a certain warranty period. But very effective. Customer sat scores are extremely good. Definitely see a lot of promise in that, especially for simpler things. You know, a lot of people, they drive their car to work at 8. It's sitting there for 9, 10 hours. You can turn the car around and have it ready for them when they're done at work.
I think the concept's great, right? As Helmut said, the pickup, right, you can do it on the Audi side as well. Here's a couple barriers I think we got to think our way through. One of the constraints at dealerships today is service techs, right? There's a shortage of service techs in the industry, right? That's why you get in the military programs and bring them in. You start putting these people in cars driving around to fix vehicles, right? First of all, do they have the right tools? It depends on the type of repair that you need. Have you reduced their efficiency, and is it worth the customer service trade-off, right? I think the whole concept of making it convenient for the customer can go beyond fixing it there, picking it up, bringing it back to a central location. We're going to have the mentality in the company with, will the engineers allow you to do that, right? I think on the software end of it, if we can figure out how to deliver software updates at a customer site, I think that's a quicker one. The hard parts, I think, is going to be a little bit more. It's going to require a little bit more thought and infrastructure.
And at Toyota and Lexus, we've not gone out to send techs either. I think very much like Anu said, is our quality department is really concerned about the quality of the repair. So quality of repair for a campaign is really important, and it can get you in trouble if we're not careful with it. So having the master technicians and the service technicians on site for our quality department has been key. And it's unfortunate because they're already having to come into the dealership for a recall, so it is concerning convenience. But I don't think we have any plans to go out remotely. It will be done in the dealerships for the time being.
Okay. Question from my side, and we're beginning to run out of time a little bit, is how easy is your job going to be from now on with connected cars? That as you drive past a dealer or drive past a certain signpost, they'll send a message to you saying that I'm going to need a new set of brake pads or whatever it is that I'm going to need. So it's going to be easy from your side from then on. Are you seeing any of the benefits of these connected cars? Is it actually happening now on the service parts side? We hear that's going to be the future, but is any of that actually happening now where you get advance notices on where a car might need repairs?
Ford is looking at ways to benefit the customer, but we're certainly trying to be unobtrusive in that. I mean, I think a lot of customers really don't want to be bombarded with messages around having to get their vehicle repaired. So there is a separate work stream. It's called the Consumer Experience Movement. Ford Pass is one of the key applications that'll help customers really, I think at their own pace, figure out how they want to service their vehicle and get their vehicle serviced. But you don't want to push it to them constantly. You want them to really pull that information and data.
Yeah, on the Audi side, when you drive on the lot, we know you're there, by name, your vehicle history, et cetera, what you're there for, right? What you're talking about, I think you got to take you can take it one step further and say, what about autonomous driving, right? What's that going to change in terms of repairs? Is it going to have fewer collision repairs, all that kind of stuff? I as I do, I get my own opinions about big data. You can collect all the data you want, right? And you can get it. What the hell are you going to do with it? Right? I mean, that to me is the trick. And as Helmut said, you don't want to bombard these guys, right? But I think there's opportunity. I think the construction ag business, from at least my understanding of it, is ahead of us in that regards. Hours usage of combines, harvesters, et cetera. Because if one of those pieces of equipment isn't working, they're not harvesting the crop, they're not making money. So I think it's more advanced on that side, and we're kind of watching to see what happens there.
Louis, right now we don't have any plans. We maintain the relationship with our customers as they're concluding their service. We basically introduce different phases and different levels of service that will be coming up. So we begin to give them 1 year notice, up to 6 months notice. So when that service writer when that service is due or that it's up, that for maintenance, it's not a surprise. The customer can start planning, 6 months out. So right now, that's a face-to-face discussion that's taking place, and it seems to be rather successful. So I think as part of the ownership experience, we'd like to maintain that face-to-face with the customer, giving them pre-notice, giving them a chance to plan well in advance versus automation telling them it's time for service or maintenance.
And I take your point about bombarding the customer and too much connectivity with the client, because only today I had an experience with my wife where she got a message from the bank saying she needed more money, so she sent me a message immediately telling me that I needed to put more money in her account, so it can be obtrusive.
Okay, so the question is, why are there two accounts?
Her money's her money,
Or
my
enough
money's
money.
our money. Okay, well, I'd like to thank the panel for a very interesting discussion again on service parts and after sales. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Good event, Pat.
Please join us for the coffee break hosted by Sergere. We've got a great session in the afternoon on kind of supply chain 4.0, looking at the technology side. And we will be doing a voting survey in that session. So when you come back in, make sure you connect to our Automotive Logistics Live. Thank you.